Morning light spilled across the eastern pastures of Willow Creek Ranch as I guided my horse along the fence line. The land stretched before me in gentle waves of grass, dotted with grazing cattle and bordered by cottonwood trees that marked the path of underground water. This was more than just property to me. This was my heritage, my future, my responsibility. My great-great-grandfather had settled here in 1887, specifically because he recognized the value of the natural aquifer that blessed this particular stretch of county. The horse beneath me, Thunder, knew the path by heart. We had ridden this same route every morning for the past 15 years, ever since my father passed and left me as the fourth-generation steward of Willow Creek. I patted Thunder's neck as we approached the natural spring that fed our main irrigation system. The water bubbled up clear and sweet from the limestone bedrock, pooling briefly before flowing into channels my grandfather had meticulously engineered during the drought of the 1950s. I dismounted and knelt beside the spring, dipping my hands into the cool water. This was the lifeblood of everything we had built here. The aquifer beneath our feet was massive, stretching across several properties, but the primary access points all lay within our boundaries. My grandfather had been wise enough to secure extensive water rights when such things were still considered generational investments rather than corporate assets. I pulled my logbook from my saddlebag and recorded the water levels, flow rate, and clarity. 5 generations of my family had kept these records, tracking seasonal variations and ensuring we never took more than the land could naturally replenish. The leather-bound books filled an entire bookshelf in my office, documenting our relationship with this precious resource through droughts, floods, and changing agricultural practices. Thunder nudged my shoulder impatiently. He knew our routine included apples from the small orchard near the eastern boundary, where the water table rose close to the surface. I remounted, and we continued our morning patrol. As we crested the gentle rise that marked the edge of our property, I frowned at an unfamiliar sight. Bright orange survey stakes protruded from the ground near the boundary line. I guided Thunder closer, my unease growing. The stakes were new, driven deep into the soil and marked with unfamiliar numbers. They created a straight line that cut suspiciously close to the spring-fed creek that sustained our eastern fields. I pulled out my binoculars from the saddlebag and scanned the area beyond our property. In the distance, I could see figures moving methodically across the adjacent land, carrying equipment and marking additional points. That land had remained undeveloped for decades, owned by Old Man Peterson until his passing last year. I had heard rumors of a sale, but had received no official notification of new neighbors or development plans. The survey markers were particularly concerning because they followed the underground path of the aquifer, something that would not be obvious without specialized geological knowledge. Thunder shifted nervously beneath me, picking up on my tension. I made note of the exact locations of the markers in my logbook, including their proximity to our water sources. Something about this felt wrong. These were not the actions of someone building a simple home or even a traditional farm operation. This systematic approach suggested larger plans, and their focus on the water flow lines sent a chill down my spine despite the warm morning sun. I turned Thunder back toward the ranch house, my peaceful morning routine disrupted by growing concern. Whatever was happening, I needed to investigate further. 5 generations of my family had protected this land and its water. I would not be the one to let it slip away. The ranch house came into view as we descended the hill, its sturdy presence a reminder of everything we had built here. I had no idea then that the orange stakes were just the beginning of a battle that would test everything I believed about property rights, justice, and the true value of the resources we too often take for granted. The mechanical growl reached my ears before I saw its source. 3 days had passed since I discovered the survey stakes, and each morning had brought more markers, creeping closer to my property line. I had called the county office twice, but received only vague assurances that they would look into it. This morning, the sound of heavy machinery drove me from my breakfast table and back into the saddle. I urged thunder into a canter as we approached the eastern ridge. What I saw as we crested the hill stopped me cold. Two large excavators and a bulldozer were carving a deep trench directly along my property line. The fresh wound in the earth extended nearly a quarter-mile, cutting perilously close to the underground water channels that fed my irrigation system. My heart hammered against my ribs as I spurred thunder forward. Workers in bright yellow safety vests scattered like startled birds as I approached, clearly surprised by my arrival. I reined in hard near the nearest excavator, where the operator had frozen in place, his machine still idling. "What in God's name do you think you are doing?" I demanded, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent worksite. "This is private property. You are digging right on my boundary line." The workers exchanged uneasy glances. One man in a white hard hat approached, clutching a tablet. "Sir, we have all the proper permits. This work is authorized by the Sycamore Springs Homeowners Association. We are installing water infrastructure." Water infrastructure, on my property line, without so much as a notification. My anger grew with each word. No one has permission to touch anything that affects my water sources. Not now, not ever. "Is there a problem here?" A new voice entered the conversation. A man in pressed khakis and a polo shirt emblazoned with Sycamore Springs HOA stepped out of a gleaming white SUV that had pulled up unnoticed. He moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Harrison Wells, HOA president," he introduced himself with a smile that never reached his eyes. "And you must be the Willow Creek Ranch owner." He did not offer his hand. "James Willow," I replied stiffly, dismounting to face him at eye level. "And yes, there is a problem. You have heavy machinery digging along my property line without any prior notification or permission." Wells produced a folder from his vehicle and extracted a document with exaggerated patience. "We have easement rights for utility installation. Everything is properly filed with the county." He held the paper out as if it settled everything. I did not take it. Any easement affecting my property would require my signature, which you do not have. And anything affecting the water sources on my land requires approval from the State Water Board. "This is not technically on your property, Mr. Willow. We are precisely 6 inches inside our development boundary." His condescension was palpable. The Sycamore Springs development represents the future of this county. 300 new homes, a golf course, community pools. Progress, Mr. Willow. Something this area desperately needs. My blood ran cold as the scope of their plans became clear. "And where exactly do you plan to get water for all these amenities?" "This is ranch country. Water rights here are allocated based on historical usage, not on the whims of developers." Wells smiled thinly. "We have conducted extensive geological surveys. There is a substantial aquifer beneath this area, more than sufficient for our needs." "My aquifer," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "The one that has sustained my ranch for 5 generations." "Natural resources are not private property, Mr. Willow. That kind of obsolete thinking is precisely what holds rural communities back. This development will bring jobs, tax revenue, and modern living standards to this county." I looked past him to the trench they were digging, now recognizing the width and depth specifications of industrial water pipes. You cannot simply take water that belongs to established agricultural operations. There are laws. Laws written by forward-thinking people like myself who sit on county commissions, Wells replied smoothly. Now, if you will excuse us, we have a schedule to maintain. He turned his back on me, a clear dismissal. The workers hesitated, looking between us before slowly returning to their machines. I remounted Thunder, seething with impotent rage as Wells climbed back into his SUV. That afternoon, I spread every property document I possessed across my dining room table. Deeds, water rights certificates, county maps, geological surveys conducted by my grandfather in the 1960s. The picture they painted confirmed my worst fears. The Sycamore Springs development was positioning itself to tap directly into the main channel of the aquifer that fed my entire operation. Without that water, Willow Creek Ranch would become just another failed agricultural footnote in county records. I called my nearest neighbor, Frank Rodriguez, whose family had ranched the adjacent property for nearly as long as mine. "They are hitting you too," he asked grimly when I explained the situation. "They tried to buy me out last month. When I refused, they mentioned something about condemning portions of my land for community infrastructure." By nightfall, I had spoken with 6 other local landowners. Each had a similar story. Sycamore Springs was not just a development. It was a calculated water grab disguised as suburban progress. The battle lines were drawn, and I suddenly realized I was fighting not just for my ranch, but for an entire way of life that was under siege. The offices of Mar. Tinez and Associates occupied the top floor of the only 3-story building in our county seat. The reception area, with its leather furniture and abstract art, felt worlds away from my ranch. I clutched a weathered leather portfolio containing documents that represented the entire history of Willow Creek water rights. Elena Martinez greeted me with a firm handshake. Her reputation as the toughest water rights attorney in 3 counties had brought me here. "Mr. Willow, I have been expecting someone from your area to show up at my door. The Sycamore Springs development has been causing quite a stir in legal circles." I followed her into a conference room where I carefully laid out my documents. "They started digging 3 days ago. No proper notification, no consent. Just moved in with heavy equipment and started laying pipe infrastructure." Attorney Martinez examined the century-old water rights certificate with professional interest. Her fingers traced the elaborate script that certified my great-grandfather's claim to the underground water resources. "This is extraordinary documentation. Most families do not maintain such detailed records." She picked up a geological survey from 1967, marked with my grandfather's neat handwriting. "Your grandfather clearly understood the value of what lay beneath your land." "Water has always been respected in my family," I explained. "Each generation has taken its stewardship seriously." "And that will be our strongest argument," she nodded. "Under the doctrine of prior appropriation, your historical use takes precedence over any new claims. These grandfather clauses are powerful legal tools, especially with documentation this comprehensive." Hope flickered as she continued examining the papers. "The aquifer mapping is particularly valuable. It clearly shows the primary flow channels run beneath your property before reaching any other." My optimism faded when I returned to the ranch that evening to find the construction had not only continued, but accelerated. A second trench now paralleled the first, with massive concrete junction boxes already installed at regular intervals. I took photographs with my phone as evidence while a security guard in a Sycamore Springs uniform watched from their property line. "You cannot be here, sir," he called out when I attempted to document a section that appeared to cross my boundary. "I am on my own property," I replied firmly, continuing to photograph the encroachment. The next morning, I received a cease and desist letter from the Sycamore Springs HOA, claiming I was interfering with authorized construction. I forwarded it immediately to Attorney Martinez, who responded with a letter of her own, demanding all construction affecting the aquifer be halted pending a review of historical water rights. That afternoon, I visited the county record's office to research the Sycamore Springs Development Company. The clerk, a woman who had graduated high school with my sister, looked nervously over her shoulder before speaking in a low voice. "James, you should know that Commissioner Bradshaw, Commissioner Higgins, and Commissioner Torres all received substantial campaign contributions from Sycamore Springs investors last year, and the permit applications for this development bypass several normal review stages." The implications were clear. This fight extended beyond simple property disputes into the realm of local politics and potential corruption. What had begun as boundary markers had evolved into a threat to my entire livelihood and the integrity of our local government. As word spread through the agricultural community, support arrived in unexpected ways. Frank Rodriguez showed up at my fence line with 4 other neighboring ranchers. Without being asked, they positioned themselves as witnesses, documenting the construction and establishing a physical presence that made the security guards noticeably uncomfortable. "We are all in this together," Frank told me as we watched the machinery continue its relentless progress. "If they can take your water today, they will come for ours tomorrow." The first pink light of dawn revealed the full scope of what had happened overnight. While my attorney filed motions and our small coalition of ranchers gathered evidence, the Sycamore Springs development had worked through the darkness. A completed main pipeline now cut through the eastern section of my ranch, an ugly metal and concrete scar across land that had been in my family for generations. I followed the pipeline on horseback, documenting every foot of the invasion with my camera. The main line ran parallel to my property for nearly a mile before turning sharply toward the heart of the Sycamore Springs development. At the junction point stood a newly constructed pumping station, its concrete foundation still damp, control panels gleaming in the morning sun. Through my binoculars, I could see that the pumping station housed industrial-grade equipment designed for high-volume water extraction. According to the specifications visible on the machinery, this single station could draw thousands of gallons per hour from the aquifer. The implications were staggering. At maximum capacity, this system could potentially drain the accessible water from my section of the aquifer within months rather than years. I called Elena Martinez immediately. "They have installed a full pumping station overnight," I reported, my voice tight with controlled fury. "Industrial capacity. This is not for residential water supply. This is commercial-scale extraction." "Document everything," she instructed. "I am filing emergency injunctions today, but we need evidence of immediate harm to expedite the hearing." That evidence came sooner than expected. By mid-afternoon, I noticed a worrying drop in the water level of my main stock pond. The electronic monitoring system I had installed the previous year showed a 15% reduction in subsurface pressure throughout the eastern section of the ranch. I photographed the gauges and sent the images to Martinez, along with historical readings showing the dramatic change. My cattle gathered restlessly around the shrinking water sources, sensing the disruption to their environment. 5 generations of careful resource management was being undone in a matter of days by corporate greed masquerading as community development. That evening, I made a decision. If the legal system would not provide immediate protection, I needed to confront the issue directly. The monthly Sycamore Springs HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock according to their website. I would attend and force them to address what they were doing to my land and water. The Sycamore Springs Clubhouse was a Mediterranean-style building with dramatic lighting and a valet parking service. I parked my mud-splattered truck between gleaming luxury vehicles and made my way to the meeting room. The contrast between this opulent facility and the struggling agricultural community it threatened fueled my determination. I slipped into the back of the room as Harrison Wells called the meeting to order. He stood at a podium with a digital presentation displaying architectural renderings of swimming pools, fountains, and lush green golf courses. Water features dominated every image, a stark insult to those of us who understood the true value and scarcity of water in this region. Phase 1 water infrastructure has been completed ahead of schedule, Wells announced proudly. Our exclusive water access will ensure that Sycamore Springs remains green and beautiful even during drought conditions that affect surrounding areas. I moved toward the microphone set up for community comments, ignoring the disapproving stares from residents in designer clothing. When my turn came, I introduced myself. My name is James Willow. My family has ranched the property adjacent to your development for 5 generations. The water you are so proudly stealing has sustained our agricultural operations for over a century. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as I displayed photographs of the pumping station and the dropping water levels on my property. This is the direct result of your pumping operation that began yesterday. You are not just taking water. You are threatening the livelihood of every agricultural operation in this county. Wells immediately moved to cut me off. You are not a resident of Sycamore Springs. This meeting is for homeowners only. Your actions affect everyone in this watershed, I persisted. Your residents should know that their green lawns come at the expense of food production and ecological balance. A security guard approached as Wells cut the microphone. This person is trespassing. Please escort him from the premises. As I was led toward the exit, several homeowners approached with concerned expressions. We were told the water system was sustainable, one woman said quietly. They never mentioned anything about affecting local farms. Ask them where your water comes from, I suggested as the guard ushered me through the door. Ask them about the aquifer rights and historical usage patterns. You have a right to know what your HOA is doing in your name. The confrontation had not gone as I had hoped, but I had planted seeds of doubt among the homeowners. As I drove home under a canopy of stars, I reflected on what I had learned. The Sycamore Springs development was completely dependent on water from my aquifer. They had no secondary water source, no backup plan. I arrived home to find Frank Rodriguez waiting on my porch with Sam Turner, a retired hydrologist who had worked for the State Water Board before settling in our community. Sam spread detailed water system maps across my kitchen table. Based on their infrastructure and the geological formations in this area, they have no alternative water source, Sam confirmed, tracing the underground channels with a weathered finger. Their entire development depends exclusively on this aquifer connection. For the first time since this conflict began, I felt a glimmer of hope. My family had secured comprehensive water rights and maintained careful documentation for generations. If Sycamore Springs had no alternative water source, then their fate quite literally rested in my hands. Their arrogance had led them to build an entire community dependent on a resource they did not control. "What exactly are you thinking, James?" Frank asked, recognizing the change in my expression. I am thinking it is time to remind some people about the true value of water rights in ranch country, I replied. And I know exactly who can help us do that. The County Extension Office of the State University had served agricultural communities like ours for generations. Today, it became the unlikely headquarters for our counteroffensive. Around a conference table sat an assembly of specialists I had spent a week gathering. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, water rights attorney and professor; Tomas Vasquez, environmental engineer specializing in aquifer management; and Robert Two Hawks, representing the Indigenous Water Council, whose historical claims predated even my family's. My kitchen table water rights documents now shared space with comprehensive hydrological surveys, three-dimensional aquifer maps, and legal precedents from similar cases across the western states. The technical language of water law and aquifer management became our ammunition. "The documentation your family maintained is extraordinary," Dr. Montgomery said, examining the leather-bound volume of water measurements my grandfather had kept during the drought of 1953. "These records establish not just usage, but responsible stewardship over multiple generations." "And the key factor here," Tomas added, pointing to a cross-section diagram of the aquifer, "is that the primary recharge zones and natural flow channels both originate on your property. The water literally enters the system through your land before reaching any other access point." Robert Two Hawks nodded solemnly. "Water is not simply a resource to be claimed. It is a responsibility to be honored. Your family has demonstrated that understanding for generations. The courts have increasingly recognized this traditional perspective." Over the next 3 days, we developed a comprehensive water management plan that would protect my historical water rights while implementing the latest conservation technologies. The plan included precise monitoring of aquifer levels, strategic flow management, and documentation of all water-related activities. A crucial component emerged during our planning. Under both state law and historical precedent, as the primary water rights holder, I maintained legal authority to manage water flow across my property, including restricting water to secondary users during critical periods. "To be absolutely clear," I asked Dr. Montgomery, "I have the legal right to control the flow of water through my property, even if it affects downstream users. Provided you can demonstrate you are doing so to protect your historical usage rights and the sustainability of the resource, yes," she confirmed. "The doctrine of prior appropriation is very clear on this point." Armed with this knowledge, I began implementing our plan. Custom flow control valves were installed at strategic junctions where I maintained legal access. Electronic monitoring systems were upgraded to provide real-time data on water levels and usage patterns throughout the aquifer. Everything was meticulously documented to establish our commitment to responsible resource management. For nearly a week, I watched and waited, gathering baseline data, while the Sycamore Springs development continued its water-intensive operations. Swimming pools were filled. Irrigation systems ran continuously despite recent rainfall, and their decorative fountains flowed day and night in a grotesque display of resource waste. Then nature provided the opportunity I had been waiting for. A heat wave struck, pushing temperatures above 90 degrees for 3 consecutive days. Drought conditions were officially announced by the state agricultural department, triggering special water management protocols. "It is time," I told Frank as we stood beside the main valve control station we had installed near the eastern property boundary. With methodical precision, I adjusted the flow controls, reducing water pressure to the unauthorized HOA infrastructure to the minimum legally required during drought conditions. The reaction was swift and predictable. Within hours, my phone began buzzing with increasingly urgent messages from the Sycamore Springs Management Office. The first were phrased as inquiries about temporary water pressure issues. By evening, they had escalated to demands for immediate restoration of normal service. I did not respond to any of the messages. Instead, I continued monitoring the water levels throughout my property, documenting the improved conditions in my stock ponds and irrigation channels as the natural balance slowly restored itself. The security cameras I had installed captured 3 separate attempts by HOA representatives to access my property that night. Each time, they approached the valve stations but found them secured behind heavy-duty locks and warning signs citing state water regulations. The following morning, Harrison Wells himself appeared at my property line, his pristine SUV raising dust clouds as it skidded to a stop. Our security camera captured him exit the vehicle, face flushed with anger. "Willow," he shouted toward my house, "I know what you are doing. Turn the water back on immediately." I walked calmly from my porch to meet him at the property line, a folder of documentation in hand. Thunder grazed peacefully nearby, a deliberate reminder of the agricultural heritage at stake. "Mr. Wells," I replied evenly, "I am simply exercising my legal water rights during a state-declared drought emergency. I have prioritized historical agricultural usage as required by state law." "This is sabotage," he sputtered, his carefully cultivated polish cracking. "You cannot just cut off water to 300 homes." "I have not cut off anything," I corrected him. "I have implemented state-mandated conservation measures to protect an essential resource during drought conditions. Your homes still have water, just not enough for swimming pools and golf courses during a water emergency." "We will sue you into oblivion," he threatened, jabbing a finger toward me. "I have connections throughout this county. Your little ranch will be a memory by the time I am finished." I opened my folder and handed him a copy of my water rights documentation, along with the current drought emergency declaration. "My attorney suggested you might want to review these before making threats. The documentation has already been filed with the State Water Board and the County Emergency Management Office." Wells stared at the papers, his jaw tight. "This is not over," he said before storming back to his vehicle. "No," I agreed quietly as he drove away. "It is just beginning." The county courthouse steps had become almost familiar territory over the following weeks. Judge Maria Ramirez presided over the emergency hearing requested by the Sycamore Springs HOA. Despite their demands for an immediate ruling, the judge insisted on a proper review of all documentation. "The court acknowledges the concerns of the Sycamore Springs community," Judge Ramirez stated from the bench. "But water rights in this jurisdiction follow the doctrine of prior appropriation, and Mr. Willow has presented extensive documentation of historical usage dating back to 1887. The HOA attorney, a sharp-suited woman from a big city firm, argued that modern community needs should take precedence over outdated agricultural claims. Judge Ramirez removed her glasses and fixed the attorney with a stern look. "Counselor, water law in this state was established specifically to prevent exactly the type of appropriation your client appears to be attempting. The court will not invalidate a century of established water rights precedent based on the recreational desires of a new development." The hearing concluded with a denial of the HOA's emergency motion. The judge ordered a full environmental impact study before any further extraction could be permitted beyond the minimum residential allocation already provided. Local media covered the courthouse proceedings, with the county newspaper running a front-page story under the headline "David versus Goliath. Local rancher defends water rights against developer." Social media erupted with support for our cause, with many comments coming from people who had experienced similar conflicts with aggressive development. Elena Martinez and I exited the courthouse to find television cameras and reporters waiting. "Mr. Willow, what does this ruling mean for your ranch?" a reporter called out. "It means that generations of responsible water stewardship still matter in this county," I replied. "It means that natural resources cannot simply be taken by those with the most money or political connections. It means that there is still justice for those who work the land." Inside the Sycamore Springs community, the pressure was building on the HOA leadership. I received an anonymous call from a homeowner who had been present at an emergency board meeting. "They are getting desperate," the caller informed me. "Wells is facing serious questions about why he built an entire community without securing proper water rights. Property values are already dropping as word spreads about the water situation." That night, my security cameras recorded 4 masked figures cutting through my fence line. They vandalized one of my monitory NG stations and spray-painted threats on my equipment shed before ranch hands responding to the security alert drove them off. The following morning, I found my main irrigation channel had been deliberately contaminated with motor oil. I filed police reports for each incident, building a paper trail of escalating harassment. Elena Martinez used these incidents to file for a protective order against the Sycamore Springs HOA and its representatives. The conflict reached its climax 3 nights later when my night manager, Miguel Rodriguez, called at 2 in the morning. "Boss, you need to get out to the east pasture now. We caught them red-handed." I arrived to find Miguel and 2 other ranch hands standing guard over a work crew in Sycamore Springs maintenance uniforms. A small excavator was positioned next to a freshly dug pit that led directly to one of the main aquifer access points on my property. The workers had been attempting to create an unauthorized direct connection to bypass my legal control of the water flow. "Call the sheriff," I instructed, "and make sure your phone is recording everything." As the workers were led away by county deputies, Harrison Wells arrived, apparently having been called by one of his crew. He froze when he saw the sheriff's vehicles and the evidence of trespassing and attempted water theft. "Mr. Wells," Sheriff Taylor said, "I need you to explain why your maintenance crew was conducting unauthorized excavation on private property at 2 in the morning." Wells stammered something about emergency repairs before demanding to speak with his attorney. The sheriff was unimpressed. "You can call whoever you want, but these men are being arrested for criminal trespass and attempted theft of natural resources. And based on the equipment involved, this appears to be a premeditated operation, not an emergency response." The equipment seized from the work crew bore Sycamore Springs Maintenance Department markings, providing indisputable evidence linking the HOA directly to the attempted water theft. The local news crews arrived as the sun rose, capturing footage of the excavation site and the sheriff's investigation. By noon, the story had been picked up by national media outlets, framed as a classic tale of corporate overreach versus individual rights. The court of public opinion had delivered its verdict, and Sycamore Springs was losing badly. 4 months after that night of attempted water theft, I walked the eastern boundary of my ranch in the cool morning air. Newly installed boundary markers gleamed in the sunrise, each one precisely positioned according to the court's final ruling. The legal battle had concluded with a comprehensive judgment that left no room for future disputes. Judge Ramirez had issued a detailed ruling that confirmed my primary water rights while establishing clear guidelines for reasonable shared access. The Sycamore Springs development was permitted to draw a specifically allocated amount of water for residential use only, with strict monitoring and reporting requirements. Any recreational water usage required separate approval and was subject to immediate restriction during drought conditions. The most satisfying aspect of the resolution came not from the courts, but from within the Sycamore Springs community itself. Following the criminal charges against the maintenance crew and the civil judgment against the HOA, the homeowners had voted to remove Harrison Wells and the entire board. The new leadership had approached me with a genuine desire to reset relations. The new HOA president, Diana Chen, had been one of the homeowners who questioned Wells during that first contentious meeting. She now led a reformed association with a strong focus on sustainable water usage and community responsibility. "Mr. Willow," she had said during our first meeting, "many of us bought homes here because we love the natural beauty of this area. We never wanted to damage the agricultural community or steal resources. We were misled by the previous board and the developers. Together, we had developed a collaborative water management plan that respected historical rights while providing for the reasonable needs of the residential community." Several Sycamore Springs residents with environmental backgrounds now served on a joint water conservation committee that monitored usage and implemented cutting-edge conservation technologies throughout the development. Back at the ranch house, I reviewed the latest readings from our upgraded monitoring system. The aquifer levels had stabilized, returning to historical norms now that the excessive extraction had been halted. My cattle once again had abundant water, and the irrigation systems functioned at full capacity. What had begun as a threat to my livelihood had transformed into an unlikely partnership focused on regional water conservation. As climate change increasingly threatened water resources throughout the country, our collaborative approach was being studied as a model for other communities facing similar conflicts. In my office, I had installed a memorial plaque honoring my grandfather's foresight in securing and documenting our water rights. Beside it hung framed copies of the court ruling and the collaborative water management agreement. Together, they represented both the struggle and the resolution, a reminder that standing firm for what is right can indeed lead to justice. The battle had required tremendous personal sacrifice. Legal fees had depleted savings, and the time spent fighting had taken away from ranch operations. Yet the precedent established would protect not just Willow Creek Ranch, but other agricultural operations facing similar encroachment. As I completed my morning inspection, Diana Chen and several members of the Water Conservation Committee arrived for our scheduled meeting. They no longer came as adversaries, but as partners in responsible resource management. Together, we would walk the property line, examining the monitoring stations and discussing upcoming conservation projects. "Good morning, James," Diana called out as they approached. "We brought the water usage reports for the last quarter. The conservation measures have reduced consumption by 30%. I nodded in approval, reminded that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating an enemy, but from transforming them into allies. Willow Creek Ranch continued its generational legacy, now with strengthened legal protections and a deeper appreciation for the responsibility that comes with stewarding precious resources. Standing firm against powerful interests had indeed resulted in justice that served both individual rights and the greater community good. The aquifer continued to flow beneath our feet, sustaining both the ranch that honored its value and the community that had learned to respect its limits.